than now. In his Antarctic reports, our science editor Lawrence McGinty, who's now back at ITN, had the latest worrying news about global warming and damage to the ozone layer. Tonight, he summarises those findings and reports on today's political and scientific reaction to them.
On Monday's News at 10, we reported from the Antarctic on evidence that climatic warming has come to the frozen continent. Glaciers have melted in the last 50 years, and scientists have seen changes in wildlife populations that they think could be a sign of global warming. Ice shelves are breaking up around the shores of the continent. More and more scientists see these changes as symptoms of global warming that could release huge amounts of melted ice and raise sea levels around the world by 15 feet. We turn to ozone destruction on Tuesday's News at 10, travelling to Halley Base, where the ozone hole over Antarctica was first discovered 15 years ago. They've been monitoring it ever since, and there's now a new warning from scientists that people living in Britain could be affected by an ozone hole around the Arctic too.
Within 20 or 30 years, there's some predictions that we might actually have an ozone hole in the Arctic as big as the current Antarctic one.
That means we'd run the same risks of burns and skin cancer that face people working at Halley because of the extra ultraviolet light from the sun let in through the ozone hole. I showed our reports to Chris Rapley, the British Antarctic Survey's director, and asked him for his assessment of the evidence we'd seen in Antarctica on global warming.
In terms of the Antarctic, our concern there is to do with mean sea level. Will the Antarctic ice sheet ultimately melt and raise mean sea level? The latest satellite data from radars on satellites shows that it's still what might be called the slumbering giant. Not much is happening at present. But in the end, on hundreds of years timescale, we do expect it to melt, and we're already seeing some activity around the periphery on the northernmost ice shelves.
Morning, Minister.
Hello, Lawrence. Nice to meet you. I've been watching your programmes. Fascinating.
I brought a tape to show. This morning, I discussed our reports with Deputy Prime Minister and Environment Secretary John Prescott and asked him how world leaders were responding to the alarm bells sounding in the Antarctic.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say that public opinion is now much more concerned about environmental issues, particularly because of programmes like yours, Lawrence. They look at it, they associate what is happening in the Antarctica, for example, the ozone layer, and they say to themselves, I'm not going to allow my children to sunbathe as much as my parents used to do. And in that sense, they see the connection between the pollution, the environmental problems, and their personal lives. And that's helped us to get a greater political pressure on to get movement. And we are moving in a number of areas. Your programme reminds us it's still a long way to go, but you can get global action, but you've got to move faster than we're doing at the moment.
This week, Mr. Prescott sent his junior minister, Michael Meacher, to Antarctica for the first Antarctic summit meeting. He and other ministers arrived back in New Zealand today. Before leaving, he countered criticism that the politicians had left it too late.
It is never too late. We already are at a late stage, but we can prevent the worst. We learned here this week that the ozone layer, the largest hole ever recorded, was last year. The earliest at which it can begin to recover is 2015, and it won't fully recover to 2080. If we don't take action now, it'll be considerably worse.
And pressure for future action will come, Mr. Prescott believes, from the next generation.
You know, the ones that are really having effect on it, children. Children are concerned about their environment. They watch through your television programmes, and they demand of their parents that they at least leave a world to them in a better state than they inherited.
That's the hope, that people who want to preserve this pristine environment will judge the politicians on actions, not words. Lawrence McGinty, News at 10.
And in the last of his special reports tomorrow, Lawrence McGinty will be reporting on what life's like for the British scientists, men and women, who work in the Antarctic for months or even years on end. Now, cricket and Sri Lankan captain Arjuna Ranatunga